It is 6:31. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Morrisville Town Council work session for March 20th, 2018. We have 3 items to do. First is call to order. That is complete. Now we're on discussion items. Item 2A, resolution adopting the 2018 Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Master Plan. Jerry Allens, Park Recreation and Resources Director. If you could please take us into it. Thank you.
Good evening, Council, and thank you for this opportunity to meet with you to go through our draft master plan. At this time, I'd like to just give a short introduction to recap. The town of Morrisville is contracted with the John R. McAdams Company to update our Parks and Recreation master plan. McAdams also enlisted 2 companies, Pros Consulting, who are experts in recreation planning and programming, and ETC Institute, who specialize in surveying, community surveys and things of that nature. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to Rachel Cotter from the John R. McAdams Company, who will be leading us through the review of our draft master plan. She has been the lead from McAdams and has worked with the town and staff through the entire process to bring you the draft plan that we have today. So, Rachel?
Thank you, Jerry. Good evening. First of all, thank you all for being here this evening. I appreciate the time that you're taking to meet with us about the comprehensive plan. We're in the final stretches here, so really excited to hear what comments you might have and any questions that you might have so we can get those addressed. So today we would like to give you a brief overview of the plan sections and main points of each section. While all sections are important, we have presented some of these to date thus far in previous council meetings, and we really want to focus on some of the new information, and that would be with regard to Section 6, which is benchmarking and level of service, Section 7, the overall recommendations, and Section 8, the action and implementation plan. So the goal this evening is to read feedback and answer any questions that you have so far. There'll be additional time to answer any other questions or comments offline. And after we go through each section, that will be an opportunity for you to provide any feedback or answer questions. Once we have those wrapped up, we'll move on to the next section. So the first section is the executive summary. It's exactly what it says and sounds like, and you're probably used to. It highlights the primary results from each section with just enough detail to explain those results. And this is just a list of the primary chapters within the overall master plan that are addressed within the executive summary. Any questions on this section? That's the easy one. Okay. The introduction, we provided a historical context of the town's master planning efforts. They've been going on for a while, and we wanted to summarize those and integrate them into this comprehensive plan, making sure we acknowledge all the work that's been done to date and we don't have any redundancies, but we're also continuing to address anything that hasn't been addressed since those last recommendations. This gives a general view about the master planning process, and it describes the history and changing landscape of the Morrisville community, and that's primarily with regard to population growth and being a landlocked community here, the limits for expansion of the town limits to acquire additional parkland. Any questions on the introduction?
Don't believe so.
The demographics and trends section, we've reviewed this with everyone in the past, but just to give you the quick overview of the final document, it explains the sources of population and demographic data used throughout the plan. It also is the basis for how we arrive at our population numbers and calculations for the level of service, which is one of the newer plan components we'll be discussing this evening. It describes current population and demographics plus future population estimates. And again, those are used to help us develop the level of service standards and project some of the needs for a 10-year planning horizon. And finally, it provides information about national and local trends and recreation participation.
So that isn't pure population, that's number of households.
I'm sorry?
That's number of households at the top of each bar?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So not population per se.
This particular graph is not. Yeah.
Can I ask a real quick question?
Sure.
Somewhere in here, actually, I think it was in the executive summary, you indicated that in the next 5 years, I think it was about 19% of our population will be over 55, and that was lower than the national average. Is that so? I thought that was pretty good because our demographic is typically so young. So I don't know if you had any feedback or reflection on that.
And by you thought that was good. What do you mean?
I shouldn't say good. I thought it was good. I'm happy of all the age groups we have in the town of Morrisville.
Sure.
I just thought that was higher than I expected.
And anticipated.
19%. So.
Yeah, it is a little bit surprising, especially with how much of a younger community we have in general in the Triangle. I think a lot of people are also relocating here because they do have younger members of their family here, so that might explain it a little bit. But what that does give us is a glimpse into the future and a need to tailor our recreation recommendations for those specific populations.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
No, you bring a good point, Liz, because in the last time the Triangle Core, Edgera, Cary is facing a different problem. They're having population aging, and they're having a lot of population of 55 and above that they're going to get. So they're focusing on how to face that issue, which in the next 10 to 15 years, the entire shift into there. So ours is in one of the statistics that they showed is we are getting a younger crowd, and they have different towns have their different demographics of how it comes. But overall population trend is the U.S. statistics is aging, right? That's what the trend is.
Exactly.
And I get it. We need to understand that so we're programming correctly and addressing the needs of the different groups.
Correct.
And age groups. Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to our inventory and analysis. And this is a pretty beefy section in the master plan because it looks at the existing conditions and an inventory for parks and facilities, programs, operations, and financial data. So there is included in this section an overview and qualitative analysis of current parks, open space, greenways, and facilities. This section provides a context of parks and recreation opportunities in the Morrisville area, and we did that by looking at both private and public recreation opportunities within the Morrisville town limits, but we also looked at public and private recreation offerings within a 1 mile buffer, and that's to get an overall context of all the different types of recreation offerings in this community and the adjacent communities, and we'll see a little bit later how that influences the level of service that we're proposing for the plan. And finally, it explains the results of the complete assessment of current department programs, operating budgets, and revenues. So any questions on the inventory and analysis section?
Don't believe so.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Go ahead, Michael.
Added value added.
Yes.
What's the difference? How do you define that?
Sure. And I believe if I can find this section, I can give you a reference. Oh, I'm sorry, that's me hitting the phone. I apologize. I was wondering where the ringing was.
The fire department's coming over.
Oh, I hope not. All right. Program assessment. So it breaks things down into core program areas and then the value added. And I believe we define that.
We can come back to it. That's fine. I'm sure you'll probably get to it later on in the brief.
The short answer there, typically the essential programs are the ones that you most commonly see all parks and recreation departments have. They're kind of the standard bearers that you see in Parks and Rec. Your important programs obviously are ones that a lot of people participate in, but they may serve a little bit more of the individual. Your value-added programs typically are those that concentrate more on the individuals, not community-wide special events. Those are essentially more often your essential programs. These are things like your individual swim lesson type programs for private lessons for individuals, those kind of value-added programs. So it's just in how you qualify the particular program.
Okay.
Yeah, and they typically have a set of characteristics. They might have a higher revenue recovery rate. They might have a more frequent rotation for offering new value-added programs, and they're kind of specialized programs.
Kind of more discretionary. Almost.
Yes. Yes.
Right. That's a good way to put it.
On the revenue and expenses total cost recovery, the estimated maintenance at is constant $600,000 over year. Is that?
We look back at when we reported the information. We gathered information from the Public Works Department, and one year was just a little under 600. One year was right at 600, and the next year was slightly over. And so, for a good average, we wanted to make sure that we were reflecting. Because we were reporting from 1 year, so we used the 600,000 number as a good average. I mean, they were very close those 3 years, so we rounded it basically to 600.
Good for not increasing. I would have expected some type of increase year over year, but
there was some. But what can sometimes be deceiving about that, if they had a particular project in that first year, it could have been a $40,000 or $50,000 a year project. Well, in that second year, if you didn't have that particular size project, you may have seen an increase overall, but it only showed up as a slight increase because that large project amount was not there.
Understood.
So, that's why we look more at the average of the 3 years, because year to year could be very different.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, as long as we're on this chart, I have a question about the 2015 revenue figure in that chart, and that's the chart that, in this chapter, it's on page 79. This chart is repeated, I think, 3 different times in the document. Mm-hmm. What is the number that should be in that box for revenue for 2015?
You're talking about the chart on the left there?
Okay.
Yes.
Page 79.
Page 79.
On the left, 2015, the first number on the top for revenue should probably be 1 million.
Oh, you're correct. There's supposed to be an extra one. It's 1,003,000.
Gotcha.
Okay, so there should be.
There's a zero
1
missing.
0.
Yes, there's a zero missing.
So it's 1,003,000.
Oh, the comma's in the wrong place, it looks like.
Should be between the 5 and the 6.
Oh,
Yep.
I'm sorry. Yep. I thought there was a zero. It was actually moved over one. 1,035,000. I apologize.
Still don't know what number it is.
No. So it'd be
35. Okay, got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any more questions on inventory and analysis?
Yeah, that was chapter 4. We are cruising.
Well, as we said, we really want to spend more time on the next section. So.
And you had sort of already gone over some of this in a previous presentation.
Correct. Community engagement, I think we spent some time on this in previous presentations as well, but we do want to point out that we went through a very robust public input process. And not only was it robust, it was diverse. So we tried to engage as many stakeholders and constituents as possible, and that we had wide representation from the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, staff, both within Jerry's department, but also the Planning Department and Public Works. We've met with you all a few times, and the public. We were present at 2 of the town's biggest events, the 4th of July event and the Spring Fest. So we took a lot of the information, synthesized it, and it really informs this plan. So for us, this was very much of a community and public and stakeholder input-based plan.
I had a question going back to the 79 where they have this core program area and then cost recovery goal and actual cost recovery from most recent fiscal year. So, for example, aquatics, 100% and then 435. What do you mean by those things, like 100%, 100%? Is that like a kind of a cost recovery structure, or like especially when zero NA? So, what is that? Is it a fee structure when you program your things, or what's the whole purpose of this chart?
That chart, over the years, we've had many questions about, obviously, cost recovery and programs, and we have a fee and charges policy adopted by council, and in there we have different levels of programs where we say, and it kind of relates back to this other chart we were discussing. Essential programs typically are the ones that council has chosen over the years to subsidize more of those costs. Special events, for example, things like that, where we're not recovering as much. Whereas programming, we've always set our registration fees and things for programs to maintain at least a minimum percentage recovery of direct cost, the actual supplies, materials, or staff that are in a particular program. And so we'll set a base number, let's say, 8 participants covers that cost at 100%. Well, if we get 12 participants, then you'll see we'll start to edge above 100%. And so every program, every type of program is different based on the number of people that register and what those direct costs are. And so this just kind of reflects how those have performed against that.
So how does this quantify with what Jerry asked, in the cost recovery percent of per year of 43%? Because if you're saying you're getting a 435% return on, that program,
mm-hmm.
And then pretty much most of the programs are running at 100%, at an average when you look it up. So pretty much the benchmark should be at 100% return, right? So I'm trying to see how this chart is going back to equate to the other chart
right.
on your cost recovery program, because somewhere it has to match up, right?
And the difference between the two, the gap, if you will, I think what you're observing here is these numbers on that cost recovery chart are individual programs. Aquatics, for example, if we have a swim lesson going on and we have 12 participants in that swim lesson and one instructor, the primary cost that we track there is the instructor time. The pool, because it's also used for free swimming and lap swimming and everything else, there's not a cost in there for that.
So it has to be better explained here in some form or shape, because when you're saying aquatics, so then you're putting a cost of the manual labor here, in some form or shape, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Like the instruction cost you're recovering, not the sunk cost of the equipment or running
right.
the facilities.
Right.
So, but that cost you're adding up into that 44% recovery. So,
correct.
So then that basically is little.
Yeah, and that was actually an interesting thing that we learned through this program or through this effort. As I mentioned earlier, Pros Consulting is their independent company that specializes in recreation, consulting. Over the years, as happens in any industry, standards can change. The standard that we've been using for years for our cost recovery numbers of direct cost of the individual program is something that the market, we've learned through this process, the market has started to change that standard. So as you'll see on page 78, the previous page, they're recommending now, as we go forward, that we calculate more of those indirect costs in our cost recovery for our programs. And so in the future, as we start developing that analysis, we'll be including more of those costs. So you'll see that be reported differently.
No, I totally agree. So somewhere it has to sync up or list one so that it's
right.
transparent to how the costs are coming.
Right, and that's why going from an individual swim lesson, for example, and the recovery of that one class versus the recovery of the department. When you look at, we're also maintaining general open space parks, playgrounds, and things like that have no cost recovery. That's where you come to that balance of 44%, because now you're looking at the full cost of the department, and all the administrative time and everything else gets factored in.
Yeah.
I've got another question while we're on this section. On page 88, the very last line there, you make reference to the Cedar Fork community. The town is currently leasing Cedar Fork Community Center and will eventually return the park to Wake County.
Yeah. I have a note actually in my plan for the next round in the draft that we need to word that a little bit differently. We have two arrangements with Wake County, one with Wake County Schools for Cedar Fork Community Center and one for the Cedar Fork District Park. And so the two agreements are a little bit different. They're long-term joint use agreements, so we'll be correcting that to be a little more reflective of that.
Okay. I would ask that maybe we put in there what the terms on the leases are, so that's reflected. And I would kind of scratch that and eventually return to Wake County.
Yes.
That's not a definite, and
Yeah.
There's the potential and the hope that it will always remain as either a leased property or one day the town would have the option to buy it. So
Okay.
I appreciate you reword that because it doesn't really reflect.
Yeah, we'll reword it to be more accurate to the agreement arrangements that we have.
Okay.
And obviously those lease agreements have renewable options in them, so we will have that option to renew.
Thank you.
You know, what's the history behind that? What's the history behind it? I don't know about this lease.
Is where the library was going to go.
Yeah, I get it, but how many years lease is this?
So this references two different. One is the Cedar Fork Soccer Park. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. That's right here down off of Aviation, which we have. I don't even remember what the term is on that lease.
I believe the district park is a 20-year, if I remember correctly. The community center is a 25-year, and it started in 2003.
Where we have the community center up at Cedar Fork Elementary School, we only lease that portion.
It's a joint use agreement.
Yeah, it's a joint use agreement. It's not even, yes.
But it's similar to a lease, but that's the easiest way to describe it that most people understand.
Yeah, so that needs to reflect joint use agreement, not even, okay.
Okay,
Not even the
we
word
can-
lease for that one property.
All right, we can make that adjustment.
Any other questions in community engagement? The other piece of the community engagement was the scientific survey. This not only ensures that we're providing input from a demographic that matches your communities, it also provides us with really great data. And one of those data points that we find very useful in a comprehensive plan to guide your decisions for the future is something called this priority investment rating. And I think we've presented this concept in the past, but we have these results for both facilities and programming. So these are the results from facilities, and the PIR, or priority investment rating, simply indicates where resources are best used or spent in the event that they become available. It's a way for us to prioritize decisions. And here are the results for the program PIR, and we did these for 2 different age groups: adults and youth. And I'm jumping back to the facility results really quick. I think one conclusion we can draw from this is that the priorities your community has are very much in alignment with the ongoing projects of the department. For example, aquatics is number 1. And right now, as I understand it, you're renovating your aquatics and fitness center. So we're already taking actions to meet and that align with some of the results of the survey. Greenway trails, number 3. These are actually quite typical results. We see these in a number of communities. Aquatics and greenway trails are usually number 1 and 2 on the list. But there are a number of greenway projects ongoing, specifically the Crabtree Creek Greenway project, which construction will be starting this fall. In nature parks, we're completing a master plan for the Crabtree Creek Nature Park as part of the process. And so I think we're doing a really good job, and the department as well, of already beginning to address some of these priorities that your community is requesting.
And even down to number 4 with weight and fitness, that's part of our renovation project, as well as the reprogramming of space inside the current building to expand the weight training areas.
We see similar results with the programming. Obviously, programming is based on available space and facilities. But the first couple here, swimming fitness classes, ties to the aquatics and fitness renovation. There's a number of these with outdoor music concerts that tie to some of our recommendations for expanding outdoor space and park acreage to accommodate additional events. And then all of the walking and desire for walking programs are addressed through the Greenway projects underway. So any other
questions on this one?
Sure.
So benchmarking this, did you benchmark these to the two groups, the national group and then the group we're in? Because I mean, for instance, I know Cary isn't part of the group, but okay, Apex is, but they don't have a swimming pool. So what happens when I'm sure their demographics are pretty similar, and if I'm just trying to figure out how much of this does the town provide and how much we don't provide, and how much of it is based on expectation, and then how much do you do based on that? Because, I mean, we're doing a lot of these, but how many towns provide music lessons?
Right.
I mean, I know the YMCA does a lot of summer camps, and that's in conjunction with the schools, and there's areas, so that one might be covered like that. Now, basketball, yeah, I could see us having, that's something that I think youth around the country like to play, and so we need a gym, a bigger gym than what we currently lease out through Morrisville. So that's all. It's just it's kind of a. Do you have any?
Yes, absolutely. Especially with regard to aquatics, I think some of it ties into the department's overall goals and what they want to provide to the community, versus what private recreation providers are providing to the community. I'm working with a community now who has said, we do not want to be in aquatics, period, end of story. Well, I guarantee you aquatics is going to come back on their survey as the #1 desired activity. So then we're going to be able to make recommendations for, okay, if you as the town or the jurisdiction aren't going to be providing, whatever it might be, then we need to partner with other local community agencies, community groups, leagues, athletics to provide some of those service for our community members, so we are meeting the needs. Looking at some of these things, I think a lot of these also are limited by facility space. So we'll talk a little bit about what our proposed level of service is for acquiring new facility space. We've also accounted for, in the level of service, the overall square footage per resident of indoor space. Because so many communities don't offer aquatics, we've accounted for that in the level of service that we're establishing.
Same with fitness programs. Mm-hmm. I guess yoga fits in there. Can yoga?
It does. So then the question becomes, do you want to get into the yoga and fitness industry and having an expanded fitness center with memberships that you're providing to the community, or are you going to rely on private commercial providers, which there are plenty of in the area, such as O2 Fitness or Lifetime or CrossFit? There's so many of those, it might not be the town's top desire to be in the business of providing a fitness center.
And you guys in your plan make recommendations or can help the town understand that better?
We do, and it's more from a priority perspective, based on the PIR and some of these things. We make recommendations for programs and facilities that either address the need or put it on the responsibility of other providers, or adjust the level of service to account for other providers providing services and facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
But it is important to remember, obviously, the facilities, those decisions are made at your level. They're made at the council level for what council wants to provide for the community. There are some communities who don't want the risk or work in aquatics. I've known several directors from different communities that have called me over the years to ask about our pool operation. Their communities thinking about getting into the pool business. But then there are many communities who are committed to, the swimming pools. Wake Forest, for example, is just starting a project to completely rebuild their swimming pool. I've talked to their director a couple of times. And he said if we closed that pool, they would shoot us. It's so loved by the community. People have grown up swimming there. Their kids now swim there, and he said when the question came up about funding, there was no question. Council said we're going to rebuild it. So it just depends on your community.
Oh yeah, I mean ours. I agree. As you know, we're going to go ahead and do that. It's just how big for the fitness portion is always. Right. I've always looked at is
right, and that's an area. Obviously with
all the other.
Yeah. With all the concerns about fitness today and obesity and everything else, you're seeing more and more community centers when they're rebuilding, including fitness facilities. Holly Springs recently did that with the renovation of their community center and increased their exercise space. And like I said, that's something I am hearing more and more from the field.
Good, Michael. Okay. Can move on, Ms. Cotter.
Move on. So one of the sections we want to introduce is the benchmarking and level of service section. I know we introduced the concept of benchmarking a while ago, but we do have the results from that, and they're laid out in this section. So the benchmarking basically demonstrates how Morrisville compares to peer agencies. So we selected 7 other municipal parks and recreation agencies in North Carolina across the region. We discussed those selection criteria with you earlier. We received the results from those, and these provide comparisons in many areas of facilities, funding, revenue, and operations. Within the benchmarking section in these tables, also when it was available, are statistics and standards or best practices from the National Parks and Recreation Agency in those same categories. So we kind of have 2 pieces of data that we can compare Morrisville to, both the benchmarking agency and a national standard. So this is a list of the benchmarking agencies that were selected.
And what was the reason Cary wasn't selected? I'm just curious.
One of the biggest.
One is 97,000. I just wondered, is there a?
There are a couple of reasons. When we looked at, obviously which towns we wanted to try to get information from, we started with towns that were, either similar in our size or were in the size range that we expect we could grow into in the future. And obviously, we also looked at demographic information. We looked at things like household income, minority percentages, and we tried to find communities across the country that we could compare closely to in those areas. And one of the reasons, honestly, that 2 reasons we didn't use Cary. One was just the size. Obviously, they're much larger. I mean, even twice as large as the largest group we did work with. And the other is, we know Cary pretty much inside and out. I mean, we're right next door. We know what facilities they have there, what they offer. To ask them to answer all those questions when we know where all their facilities are, it was kind of, do we really want to take that information and put it in the report, or do we want to work on finding information from other agencies? And so that's really why we looked at these agencies. All of these had similar or slightly higher household incomes. They had higher percentages of I guess you would say, minorities from the same regions of the world that we do. So we tried to be as reflective of that as we could. Okay. We had 2 other agencies that we also were reaching out to, but unfortunately, both of those agencies were impacted by the hurricanes in the fall, and they just said with the recovery efforts they had going on, they just couldn't help us.
Thanks, Jim.
And for Jerry's knowledge, that council was aware of this and blessed this too. We had this discussion early on in the process about who we would look to and benchmark against. So we were part of this discussion too. It wasn't just staff.
No, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is just another table demonstrating a result of the benchmarking exercise. We have a number in here. If there's any that you have specific questions on, I'd be happy to answer those. This one's related to cost recovery. We discussed that a little bit before, this 42%, including direct and indirect, but also maintenance. So once we do include maintenance into the budget, in terms of operational cost recovery, the town is doing quite well compared to the benchmarking agencies.
And just one thing to note, and I believe it's mentioned in here a couple of places, every town is unique in what they offer and what they have. When we first reached out to Allen, Texas, based off of the demographics and the numbers we were able to find, what we didn't realize until we did get the survey back is they have facilities like a public golf course, convention center, and other things that are ran through their Parks and Recreation Department. So in the end, a lot of their numbers are very different than ours for that reason.
Is it... The Cary would have Cocoa Booth Amphitheater
and Thomas Brooks and right, and the soccer complex and other things.
Any other questions on benchmarking? So the level of service is a chart that I want to spend a little bit of time on. The level of service is a way to quantitatively make recommendations for both where Morrisville is deficient or in surplus currently, but also for a 10-year planning horizon, and is completely based on population and population projections, which is why we spent so much time getting an accurate picture of the demographics in the earlier parts of the master plan. A couple of the results here that I do want to discuss being developed park acreage, ball fields, greenway trails, and some of the indoor facilities. But first, to give you a quick orientation to the chart, we start out with the item, and we're doing parkland, greenways, outdoor amenities, and indoor facilities. The units, the per population, so that's just simply the metric that we're using. The 2017, so the today snapshot in time that we're using for Morrisville's inventory, so the current level of service that Morrisville's offering. And then we're able to compare that in order to set our proposed or recommended level of service. We're looking at both the benchmarking communities and their median, and also the NRPA, either best practices or median from that organization. Then we can look at, based on the conditions in Morrisville, the opportunities and constraints here, how we can tailor the level of service to fit your needs, your goals, and your community. So for example, developed parkland, currently the level of service is 4.96 acres per 1,000 people. That is that's a bit below the benchmarking median of 7.7 acres per 1,000 population, and just about half of the NRPA standard. And we are recommending under both the NRPA standard and just below the benchmarking median. And we decided to bring that number down primarily because the proximity and the opportunities to parks and parkland in adjacent communities with the proximity of state parks. And there are also minimum opportunities for land acquisition and growth within this community. We wanted to give a realistic goal for the 10-year planning horizon, so that's still showing a need today at that 7.6 level of service standard. It shows that you're deficient 67, almost 68 acres, and in the next 10 years, about 135 acres. So that's how we use both the NRPA standards, benchmarking, and your current level of service to develop a recommended level of service that you can use as a quantitative guide for acquiring land for the next 10 years. So the next one we wanted to...
And you did say that takes into account the population growth, the estimated population growth?
Yes, correct. Mm-hmm.
Then is it all based on statistical information, or is it any of it based on current use of the facilities? Like, was there some type of estimate of, besides like the aquatic center and things like that, but if you think of like some of the parks around town, how often they're used?
That particular standard didn't, because we have such good data on developed parkland. But when we get down to cricket fields where there aren't any standards and there isn't a benchmarking metric, we do take into account participation rates and what they're comparable to develop that standard.
Okay, thank you.
So greenways at an existing level of service of 0.33 miles per 1,000 population is again right about at the benchmarking median, but much lower than the NRPA standard. So we're increasing that to 0.45, and we really develop that based on the coordination with the transportation plan and the greenway projects underway. And I have a page reference for you. Page 109 shows that based on this level of service, we'll be achieving what was recommended in the 2011 Parks and Recreation Master Plan for planned greenways and what's underway in terms of projects within the town. And that is a bit lower than the national standard, primarily because there are minimum opportunities for dedicated right-of-way for greenways. You have a lot more opportunities in the town based on how you're defining greenways and side paths and multi-use paths per the latest transportation plan for side paths, because it's easier to build them within existing right-of-ways than to acquire more right-of-ways. And it's also a lot lower than the national average because there is such great access to greenway systems throughout the triangle. So we felt like this was a standard that meets and correlates to your other plans, and there are plenty of other opportunities and facilities for greenway connections throughout this area.
Just a comment, Jerry, and you can handle this because Courtney isn't here, but I mean, we can ask commercial properties to build greenways. So the airport noise overlay, all that area out there, I think it would be a good idea to have connections so they could get over to the Cedar Fork District Park or the Crabtree District Park, during a lunch break, whatever. Nowadays, people love to just get out and walk. I mean, so we can do that.
We can, and under the UDO, we do require commercial development or industrial, whatever it is. If there's a greenway in our master plan in their area, then they are required to build that as part of their project. But that goes back to part of what's in our master plan, because we have limited corridors in Morrisville, stream corridors and other areas where you typically build those. That's why that number was set as low as it is compared to the national standard. The opportunity isn't as great here as it is in other areas, and especially in areas where you have growing ETJs and things of that nature that we don't have. But that area that you're talking about specifically,
bypass, aren't we doing a little larger? Why not connect that to the lake back there?
That's exactly what I was getting ready to explain. The Evans Road, at the time our last Greenway master plan was done, the Evans Road project was not funded. It wasn't on the radar. A lot of things have changed, and obviously now you see the work getting done. That road includes side paths on both sides, and so it's going to greatly improve pedestrian connectivity over to Lake Crabtree and over to the Crabtree Creek Greenway along Evans Road.
Right, but I'm talking about behind the property, closer to the other side of the lake. That's all. Because sometimes people will get frustrated it'll be a 4-lane road, cars will be going 45.
Yeah. We do still have a trail in our Greenway plan on that north side that you're talking about, closer to Lake Crabtree. And as development comes in that area, we will be working with those developments.
Because, I mean, now if you go back in the western area where Cary's doing their greenway attaching to Hatcher Creek, you can see there's a lot of, I think MetLife is back there, right?
Yep.
And it goes through their property.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So question, Jerry, and that's something, Martha, you can answer is, these plans come every 10 years, right? And that's the benchmark 10-year program. This is like the UDO or transportation plan and, the Parks and Rec plans. And our areas keep growing, ETJs keep on getting added, they don't wait for...
our ETJ isn't growing very much.
Or we have seen, where last 2 years, we have seen parcels here and there get added up. But when we design it, with a good faith effort, we didn't think that it will come into that ETJ. Like, we didn't plan that this would come as part of our ETJ, and we didn't plan for it as part of the master plan. So when they come as part of the master plan, is it something that you add it on the fly at the time? Or the reason I'm saying is...
Are you referring to greenways?
Greenways, or suppose take a property that we are Fairbanks, that was not part of our ETJ, and we added up to our ETJ, and and it's not part of our Parks and Recs, Greenway system. And one more thing would be near the apartment complex near 540, which was not part of our Greenway systems. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we just approved it, but it was not there in our Greenway thing. So how do we go about that? Yeah. So, those kind of things, just because it's not there, do we, when it comes for your review, do you add it at that time, or do you wait for a 10-year for...
Well, our master plan actually, because of growth and change in the community, has been updated much more often than 10 years. The original was 2001, then it was revised in 2006, and again in 2011. And each time, like you're saying, the Greenway plan, the second revision, I think, or the third, we added several corridors at that time. And so the original plan only had, I think, 3 named greenways in it. So we've added several as that process has gone forward. But they have to be an improved plan before development comes in, or we can't enforce construction if it's not in an already approved plan. We can't add it because somebody's coming in to build a complex and say, hey, we want you to add a trail. It doesn't work that way.
So I think that goes back to what Michael was saying with regard to the airport overlay area. If we don't have them in a plan, then we couldn't enforce it to be there.
Correct.
So are we looking ahead where there is developable land, like with the expectation that there may be greenways there so that we can enforce it? Or is that what you were saying, Satish, or are we adding it as we go?
So that's what it is.
Now I understand.
And that's exactly where I'm going to, because the 400 acres is not as part of this, I'm guessing, and the airport overlay that you're going to get.
Along the Evans Road corridor you're talking about. Okay.
That's not there. And then there might be pockets of here and there that we get it as connection or funds, which will not be there. And so people might come as part of rezoning or stuff like that, and they'll look at it and say, hey, it's not needed. So, as you rightly said, at the time when it is not there, we can't go and force them to do it. Right. So, how do we handle those kind of things? Do we have to deep dive thinking in anticipation, like Kerry does it, is like as a 20-year forward plan, they put it, you like it or not in your ETJ, we will put a roadway or a greenway as thinking, forward thinking that way.
We need to update our Greenway master plan.
That is part of the transportation plan that's currently going through the review process. We separated the Greenway plan in this cycle and added it to transportation because it has been much more of a transportation issue, pedestrian, bicycle connectivity, and those things. So it is going through the review process right now. So if you want us to take another look at that, I can get in touch with Kimberly Horn and we'll take a look at the draft plan that they have.
Because it should not be coming to us on the table and we ask them. That's the last thing we want to ask. They're sitting on the dais. Can you put us a greenway or something?
So I'll get some clarification from planning about the greenways and future that you're going to see as a part of the transportation plan and get you that information.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds like this council might be interested in addition to the side paths on either side of McCormick Extension, having additional greenways through the properties themselves.
Yeah, and that obviously that one is good, and the future ones, which are, because there's several pockets which are coming as part of getting added. Then we just get orphans in the middle.
So better to put them there,
put
and
them
then
planted.
depending on what happens, take them out, rather than not have them there and then not be able to put them in.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because we do have some sort of donut holes of ETJ over in that area.
And Lewis Stevens.
Okay.
We can expand Northwest Park.
So that's, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's one more metric I wanted to point out on the level of service, and that's with regard to indoor facilities. And we've touched on this a little bit. The current level of service is 1.1 square foot per population. It's just per individual. The benchmarking analysis is 1.14, and the level of service standard recommended by the NRPA is 1.5. We're recommending that we increase that to 2, and that might seem high, but a lot of the benchmarking agencies don't have aquatic centers, nor does the NRPA standard account for square footage of aquatic space. So we need to increase our level of service standard to account for the square feet of aquatic space that you're providing. And if we take that out, the existing level of service standard is only 0.66 square feet per resident. So you're actually quite low on facility space and indoor recreation space once we pull the square foot of the aquatic space out. So that's how we came up with that level of service standard. And any questions on level of service before we move to recommendations?
Recommend away.
I'm sorry?
Recommend away.
All right. The recommendations are very much structured like the remainder of the plan. They begin with recommendations updating the vision, mission, and values, and we had what we call a visioning session with department staff and with the Park and Rec Advisory Committee to go through this process, so it's really informed by staff and the community, not the consultant. This is where we ask folks to dream big, and then we develop the action and implementation plan, which we'll talk about, that helps the staff, the town, and the residents achieve those dreams and goals. So we established that in the recommendation section, and then it's structurally laid out with recommendations for parks, facilities, operations and maintenance, programming and finances, like the remainder of the plan. So we've developed many goals and objectives in specific areas, including parks, facilities, programs, operations, staffing, and finances. And we have some specific recommendations for improvements to several park facilities. So you can include some of those cost estimates in your CIP. And so many of these recommendations really focus around land acquisition and providing additional facility and event space to increase your program offerings and your event offerings around the community. That seemed to be one of the biggest constraints and challenges that the town currently has. So the recommendations are very much oriented around that, and also oriented around acquiring the right land and how to go about doing that. And where we can't acquire enough land or facility space within the town limits to meet what might be some typical level of service standards, we have recommendations to compensate and mitigate that focus on maintenance, renovations, and master plans for older parks to bring them up to include amenities that meet current recreation trends. Any questions on the recommendations?
I did have a question on page 116, talking about a green printing exercise to examine what land is available for acquisition. Is that was not within the scope of this plan?
You know, it wasn't, but we tried to do it anyway. And what we found when we got information back from GIS, that it actually didn't reflect a lot of the development plans on file. So I think that's an exercise that maybe the town planning department or GIS, who has the most up-to-date information and can collaborate, can undertake. It seems like things are moving quickly.
It was an interesting, as she said, interesting exercise when they gave us the first draft of a map. I started looking at it and going, yeah, we just met with a developer on this parcel. we've got a plan that was just submitted on this parcel. So there were several changes to it at that moment. So that is something that we as a staff want to look at doing in-house with Kyle and the planning department working together to do that.
Okay, so some of them, so you identified all the possible parcels, and some are taken. So we can
Right.
still.
They were looking at anything that was currently undeveloped. And then when we started looking at how many things, even though they showed as undeveloped.
They're getting taken faster than you can claim them.
Right. And that's why we feel like we do want to move forward with that exercise, but we feel like we can do that internally and have a up-to-date product.
Okay, because I was just thinking we have the expert here who knows the best type of land as well. So even though a lot of it's already taken, we'd still love that analysis.
Oh, well, we can, if you like, we can work with them and see what could be done.
Okay.
There are also additional recommendations for what is appropriate land for recreation development and how do you select land. So many departments I see get through the development process. There's required land dedication, or they get free land so often, and we find out through the design process that it's in a floodplain, so you can't put a building there. There's wetlands. The property is divided by stream corridors. There are poor soils. You have to blast with rock, and the value of blasting and construction far exceeds the cost of the donated land. So there's some recommendations in there for that as well.
Yep. And we have some standards on that already in place as well with our UDO.
Yeah, and I see a later recommendation, which is really nice, about encouraging new developers to, in lieu of payment in lieu, to actually provide what we need. So I thought that was a very strong thing that we've already discussed as a council.
Right.
Yep.
That we'd like the land rather than the money.
Yep.
Kids Creek would be a perfect example for a pocket park.
Okay. Were there any other recommendations that you wanted to highlight?
Well, there are a few here in the document that, if we can go to the next slide, some of these were some things we discussed actually last week at the council meeting. The plan gives general recommendations for acreage and things like that. One of the few things that they did call out specifically, though, as a type of facility to build, is to consider a site that is more designed for special events. Most of the parks that we have been designed for program use. They have fenced fields on them. You have only a certain amount of parking that would cover however many teams you would have on the field, or at however much turnover you would need. And so what we've found over the years at a site like that is when you have a large special event, you have to strategically move things around because of fences on fields, or you have parking issues and you're shuttling people in and they're having to park everywhere nearby, as we've experienced on a few of our events. And so that was one thing that they did call out specifically when you look at our program PR and how many people were talking about events and concerts and festivals. Right now, every time we try to schedule something like that, we always have to look at which facility, what other programs are going on. We have groups calling, wanting to rent space. We have, at the same time or time of year that we have all of our soccer programs on the fields. We're going to run into this next year repeatedly as we have cricket tournaments or cricket matches scheduled at Church Street, because a lot of people have used that for fundraising walks and small festivals and the Nepal Day activities and those kind of things that we get requests for. So that was one thing they did pull out as a specific request, was a special event, a site more geared toward special events. And to help bring events to that site, one of the next objectives you see there is continuing to grow current events, but finding partners to help grow those current events. Other agencies that would help us plan those, who would have expertise in a specific type of event. And so hand in hand, those things go with more events, more activities for the community.
So, Jerry, for just by way of example, one of the things that came up was for outdoor concerts or music venues, whatever it may be. Have we looked at, or have you considered, for example, the like that farmers market area? I know there was some discussion on the side about possibly putting like a small amphitheater, if you will, on one end of it, so that it could be like used for a venue like that instead of it just being a one-purpose.
We have talked about some options for that space once it's built and we can get a better orientation for it. A small band stage in a corner of the open green space that we think could function well for that as we extend electricity, later on into the site. Where exactly would we set those, services? We want to try it with a few smaller events first to see how the capacity works. It's not a very large green space, so we want to try it with a few smaller events first before making any investment like that. But we've talked about, for example, some minor adjustments we can make at things like Morrisville Community Park. Is there a way to add a stage there that could serve what you're talking about? Church Street Park, if we could get more parking in the area, can we add a stage on the raised end of the park? So it's got its own natural stage built in. You're not having to go in and add something, because the elevation of that one end of the park creates a nice little raised area. We're looking at ways to try to do that now.
I think that's nice.
That's the spectator seating, too.
Well, but on the very top of the hill, a small area where a performance stage could be set.
I would agree with that, and also look at the future development if the entrance ever happens for the Cedar Fork District Park, the second entrance, because then you have so much parking there.
Right.
You don't have as many fences as you do as other parks.
Right. If we can get that second access point and add some additional parking, that's something we've been talking with Wake County about as part of the expansion project. I'd love to see us be able to do more outdoor events at that site.
Right. And then Camp Luther Green, eventually there's area back there too. I know they use it as a cricket field, but at some point that might be a better venue for what you're describing because it will be near the TOD.
We'll have to see how the TOD development goes. The parking at that site now is very difficult, and there's really no room to add much.
But what's going to be bordering it all through there is
right.
what I'm trying to say. So
yeah, and as that comes into play, I think we can definitely talk more about how can that site change as that TOD development comes in.
And one last comment, I would say the Morrisville Community Park, to me, that has overflow parking on weekends because of the school. Mm-hmm. So, whatever we could do there, maybe that's something we're looking at to, develop more. I know at one point we talked about a baseball fields, right. Lights, but I prefer something more open where you could
and
these events.
Yeah, and that's definitely what I was meaning by if we go in and separate any facility, any park, new park or whatever, with fences and fields, now you're restricting what other activities you can do there, and that's why they picked out the recommendation. The one type of facility they're recommending is something that's more adequately designed for large group gatherings.
Sure. Okay.
So can I just add, as we're talking about Cedar Fork District Park, and you have a chart in here where the recommendation is to spend upwards of $2 million for, and I know we're talking to Wake County about doing all kinds of sharing of different facilities in that general area, but at the same time, are we also talking about extending our lease now? I know we have a lease agreement. You just said you think maybe 20 years.
I believe it was 20.
If we're going to talk about investing,
we would
I
definitely
would like to have a conversation of extending the lease today versus waiting.
Instead of waiting.
Because we're probably halfway through that lease. So.
We are. We're right at the halfway point now, I believe.
And one more thing, Jerry, is the key is using, I know you program it pretty good and use it to the maximum capacity, all our facilities. And that's the key component here is how can we maximize all the facilities and parks at a full capacity. And it's a challenge for you, keeping it running, the parks, because constant wear and tear is as a challenge, and keeping it is a challenge. And because we talked during when the ICC came in, because we have, I'm sure Martha, he might have briefed you, but we have one final chance, they said, is to keep the pitch ready by
They want to come back and look at it again in June.
in June, and before we get ICC in our map for Morrisville,
Yeah.
where they can get matches from West Indies, Panama, and U.S. and Canada to have it as one of the venue here. So we got to be on top of it so that once it's in the programming, and then we'll get a lot of events coming in.
We had a really good discussion with them about that, and right now they're looking for different facilities across the country where they can have those kind of matches. They want to grow the sport of cricket in the U.S. They have plans for trying to promote it through schools and other places, and they're looking for fields in different regions that can handle those kind of games. They were very impressed with the work we're doing and believe that we can be one of those in this Mid-Atlantic region.
What is the, and Jerry, you mentioned parking. What is the parking scenario or the future parking scenario for the Church Street Park?
Unfortunately, we have about 130 spaces on the site. Our only opportunity to expand is going to be adjoining properties. We're going to have to buy a new property in order to add parking. So that's really the only option. From there, we're going to be shuttling, and one of the great things about that park, and if any of you get a chance to go up there, the greenway that is built to it brings people to that park all the time. It's very convenient to several subdivisions. It's a nice short walk from a lot of places on Town Hall Drive. So even though there's not a great amount of parking, it still gets a lot of use because it is such a walkable site.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically, cricket may not be big for the next couple of years, but when it does, or if we have these venues coming and a lot of people are going to want to come and see some of these really very cool cricket teams that can play some competitive cricket, I just was concerned about.
Yeah. The TOD site.
The TOD.
It's got parking deck at the TOD.
The TOD site could help greatly with that.
We have 100 acres that is going to be Wake Tech, and they're going to have 3 or 4 parking decks. They're going to have space that we can use.
Yeah, that'll be a great shuttle location. It's very convenient. Like I said, there'll be large space, and the great thing about it is it won't be heavily used at the times we typically have events, which are weekends.
And I don't know if they have any plans to put any facilities there for athletics or parks inside. I know at some of the other places they do. North Raleigh, they do have facilities.
Yeah.
So the shuttle would go down to
Our Wake
Morrisville
Tech
Carpenter
plant.
and come back up Church.
They even have like a soccer team.
Close way to get from Wake Tech to.
We'd have to go down to McCrimmon and over to 54.
I can recheck, but I don't recall
Barbie Road
anything
anymore.
other than buildings.
And that do they have funding for only one?
But at least we can use their buildings.
Yeah, McCrimmon is not too far, so I get it.
And there's other office buildings nearby that could help with that as well.
I think we used Iron Mountain once or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Iron Mountain's been used. Cedar Fork Community Center has been used as a satellite parking site before. The Latter-day Saints have allowed groups to use their parking lot before for a shuttle site. Harris Mill Boulevard, there's a couple of office complexes there that events that have used Church Street have done shuttling from their properties. So there are several around that we can talk with.
Okay. Thanks for being innovative with the parking challenge.
Can I ask a question? I want to ask a question about if you're done with these objectives on the. I wanted to ask something about objective 1.7, and we kind of talked about it a little bit about the parkland payment in lieu versus the acceptance of land, and the priority you have on there is medium to long term. And I would suggest if we're serious about that it really should be short term. I think if you leave that for long term, it's an objective and a goal that we'll never reach.
The medium term being put there, we will be looking at that with every new development that comes in. But the reason it's more of a medium term is that land doesn't get dedicated until they actually plat their sites. And once they get approval and all their inspections and everything and actually start work, then we get the land at that point. So it's not something that we can start this year because anything that's going up this year has already been through that process and approval. And so, but we are going to be looking at that with any new site that comes in.
From this day forward?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
If I could actually take us back to Chapter 7, actually, page 117. I was curious about the Cedar Fork District Park. The grid there that you have, I thought was really useful. And that's a great way to see the recommendations. And it was nice that you did that for Indian Creek Greenway and Trailhead. But on a lot of these other ones, you indicate that we need to do a separate master plan to create something like that. I was hoping that we'd have something like that for each of our parks, since we don't have that many. Was that not part of the scope, or?
Well, several of our other parks are newer facilities, and so you don't see as much need for either renovation or repair, specifically Church Street, Northwest Park. The other ones, maybe a little bit older, or as they did their inventory, they just saw some opportunities that they made sure to pull out. But with some of them being as new as they are and as tightly developed as they are, there's just not space capacity in some of those places.
Okay. I was hoping for maybe future enhancements or sort of more really actionable items like we see on these grids, because otherwise it's still fuzzy, and I don't know if we're going to end up spending another $10,000 or $15,000 to get what we're hoping to get this time on some of those. If you sort of see where I'm coming from on that.
No, say again. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, we have, for two of our parks, we have good recommendations with dollar values. It'd be great to have that for all the parks, even Church Street. You were talking about a bandstand or something like that. Some enhancement that might help. It'd be good to sort of put some numbers around that. Spectator seating, anything that would sort of meet the needs that we've identified. So it's more actionable. So we don't have to do another separate master plan. I was hoping this was the master plan for all of our parks, but this is recommending a separate master plan for a number of our parks.
For each site to have its own specific master plan. Like I said, what they pulled out here were those areas, especially older facilities, or those that just had a lot of opportunity for improvements.
I was hoping this is a one and done.
Okay. That is some additional, obviously some additional work that could be discussed.
That's not in the scope. Is what
Okay.
It's not in the current scope to do that level of detail.
It is something that I think staff can take as a work plan item and start. Often, or several times in the past, this plan has been updated by
Revised.
staff in the past. So I think that could be a work plan item that we can work on,
Definitely.
given your interest in some of that.
Okay, I would really appreciate something like that for each park.
Okay.
What we can do to make it better.
Okay. Yeah, and there is a recommendation in here where they talk about developing those kind of plans for each individual site.
Right.
So,
Thank you, sir.
okay, thank you.
So, Jerry, I think one of the things, like in consideration for what the mayor was saying, was I know we just came up with a couple of ideas tonight. For example, with potentially a clamshell type of stage at the end of the food hub, farmers market. And the stage, I think, is what you said, the stage like at Church Street. So thinking outside the box to be able to use our existing facilities for multiple things, to think ahead, add those in there, whether they're real or they come to fruition or not. Is that kind of, aspirational.
Okay. And those are smaller projects like that are ideal things that we can add in the CIP. Those ideas get turned into project sheets that can then be discussed later.
Perfect. Makes sense. That makes sense.
Being part of an approved Parks and Rec master plan gives them a little bit more heft as well as they enter the CIP process.
I'll give a little pitch here. So what I just heard is really some of what you're going to also hear from us again next week is these are the documents that you have at your disposal to help you develop what your priorities and discussions are as we bring you forth operational items and CIP items that allow us to plan ahead. So you're thinking the same as what we're trying to advocate on your behalf. This is where you establish what you want now and what you want 3 years from now and 5 years from now and help us plan to get you there. But these are the documents that do that for you.
So are we ready to go back to objectives after I brought us back? Okay, so we're still on objectives. Does anyone have any particular questions or suggestions about any of the objectives? Chapter 8.
I would just to make sure, your Public Works, you're advocating that the service and operation be pulled back out of Public Works and into Parks and Rec, because I remember the day when we pulled it out of Parks and Rec, and put it in Public Works. Now the recommendation is put it back. So just, I see here you talk about a study, so I would understand. I don't need to know the details now, but you are going to bring us some information about why you're recommending that it be pulled back in.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on that. So that kind of recommendation, I think, is something that our consultants have indicated might be something we want to consider. We, internal staff, have already recognized that we've got some disconnects in our process, so we're already working on that internally. I can't tell you we've got a recommendation for you yet, but we are looking at ways to deal with those issues that come of some disconnects in the processes.
It's on page 150.
I would suggest two things on that. Is you guys have gone through accreditation.
Yes.
Is that something that's normal? Was it brought up at your accreditation, and then was it brought up at Public Works' accreditation as a problem?
It wasn't in our accreditation. Accreditations typically they're not evaluations. The visitors don't come in and do this level of analysis. They're looking at standards that are set that your departments are meeting. It's not necessarily this level of analysis of your operation. So it's a different approach, if you will.
Got it. But back to best practices.
Yes, sir.
I mean, if you're recommending that because that's best practices, most Public Works departments don't handle the greenways?
Greenways are
Yeah, accreditation is about how well you maintain, not who internally does it for you.
No, I understand, but best practice. Is it normally handled through
industry.
your department or Public Works?
It varies. Generally in the industry, there are some that handle it both ways. In our benchmarking survey, for example, the town of Matthews, their Public Works Department manages their parks maintenance. The other agencies in there were managed by the Parks and Rec Department. The City of Cary, all of their park maintenance is handled through a division of their Public Works Department. It's not in their Parks and Rec division. But the other towns in Wake County that I'm familiar with are handled through the Parks and Rec Department. So it varies. It's an internal decision.
But you're going to bring that information back when you all have evaluated it further. Okay.
I almost see it almost as like a line item in a budget, and just tracking is how we can get value, so we can sort of capture more of the direct costs and make sure it's allocated correctly. I don't know if we want to change the way our departments do the work, but just a matter of tracking their timesheets or something, so it's actually to Parks and Rec Department. So
well, they have a separate division within Public Works that is the Parks Maintenance Division, and so they're already doing what you're a lot of what you're talking about. Every town is just unique and depends on their unique standards. I know a couple of towns where the Public Works departments do it because there's so many other things that those same crews do.
Right.
Right-of-ways, easements, cemeteries, things like that. So each town has its own circumstance.
So staff will give us the pros and cons to each and risk and benefit.
Yeah, we're working on, I think our primary issue is making sure that we avoid those disconnects. That could just be we're not communicating well. It could be we need to do something else, not, they're supposed to be working together effectively regardless of which department is, we've got some things to work on internally before we would need to start talking about, I think, changing departments. There are reasons why it was put there. There are reasons why it wasn't there at one point. And yes, I think we need to provide you all of that to consider. I'd just offer your primary interest should be we do it right. We do it well. We do it effectively. And that's, I think, the primary interest we all have.
So is this a section of the Public Works or is the whole Department of Public Works?
Yeah, you've met Steve Dickinson. He is our Parks and Grounds maintenance crew member, and he has a whole set of crew, and they work on roadway stuff and Parks and Grounds stuff. Greenways, they take care of our athletic fields. They do all of that for us.
And if you need additional references in the master plan, both in the inventory and analysis and on page 136 of the recommendations, it talks a little bit about how and why we developed that recommendation. And it was really based on a lot of input that we received both from staff, but also our site visits and the level of maintenance that was completed. So this is based on input we received more so than, our knowledge of the history of these decisions.
Can I ask a question going back to chapter 4, the inventory and analysis? It's just a quick question. Sure. I like the ratings for the different parks and then the overall rating. Did we do that the last time, Jerry? And do we have a comparison of how we did the last time we updated? Or this?
We did not. We did not do this level of analysis.
I'm just curious how. I'm assuming we're doing better. I would hope that's the hope that.
Yeah, we didn't do that level of.
Okay. Thank you.
Inspection in 2011.
Thank you.
We're going to have future opportunities to ask questions about some of these areas in the next few work sessions.
Well, we have another briefing next week, and this item will be there on that agenda for an update and also an opportunity for any other discussion at that meeting. And you all determine the timing. I mean, if you want more opportunities to talk about it, we're willing to work with you.
I just know it looks pretty good, looks pretty thorough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Appreciate the effort.
Well, thank you.
Big picture, I mean, I think that I really liked one of Councilmember Garmelo's points about the cultural events and making sure we have opportunities for the different cultures to know about each other, sort of like what Carrie's doing. So I think that's something, as I've been going through, trying to figure out where we fit that in. It's just something to think about. Maybe it would go into new and expanded facilities. I have some questions about, tennis just based on the crowding in Church Street Park, but it looks like, given our town size, our level of service is basically meeting the standards with 6 courts. But, maybe that's something that we can look into eventually.
Yeah. Well, if looking at the tennis courts on the level of service standards by the established standards, I mean, we're currently showing a deficit of 2.
Yeah.
And that
when we renovate.
Right. And so that will change if we lose one at the Aquatic Center. But that has also always been part of the master plan for Morrisville Community Park, was to add 3 or 4 at that site, depending on obviously what the site can accommodate. And so that will be an opportunity to gain back some of that.
Yeah, we'll be 5 short in a while, in 10 years' time, so.
Yep.
Something. One thing about moving forward, we haven't really discussed the idea of possibly changing the name of the department. So I imagine we might hear something about that at the public input process and make sure that the citizens are aware that that's a recommendation. So we'll want to have some more talk about that, because I think that will be one thing that people want to definitely talk about, because that has a big effect, not on how we provide service, but how we think about it, especially because Councilmember Garamella brought up the fact that we could try to embrace more culture and have cultural events, and if we're going to remove that from the name, we just want to be careful
Yeah.
about how we do that.
Parks and Recreation is a blanket term used widely to cover all of those types of programmings and activities. I mean, even in towns that have cultural arts centers operated by their Parks and Recreation departments, typically still can be often called Parks and Rec departments. Holly Springs and Cary come to mind, where there is a great focus on those, programs and facilities for those. But still, it's a Parks and Recreation department. And it's just a common thing that most people call Park and Rec.
Yep.
And Mayor, I'd encourage you to talk about that now. If council's not interested in that, then I wouldn't be asking the public about that. If you feel strongly about that, I think you should discuss that. And you may choose to still want input, but if you're opposed to that approach, then there's no need to ask the public about that. If council has a strong feeling about that. It was a recommendation for you to consider. It's not something you have to do. None of this is anything you have to do. It's for you to consider.
Understand.
And just so I understand, the consideration was to change it to this name or change it to Parks and Rec?
And drop the cultural resources, those two words,
Yeah, okay.
right? Is that correct?
Parks,
Am I-
Recreation, and
okay.
Cultural Resources would just be Parks and Recreation Department. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts. If anyone has any, I'm okay with shortening it, but
Yeah, I mean, I would, I think it's a little bit semantics. I think Parks and Rec, I mean, there are cities and towns that are significantly more diverse than we are, and it's Parks and Rec. I don't see it as being offensive to remove it, and I don't know that it adds any cultural sense of unity or anything. I don't see a connection.
So, and would it change what we're doing today in our programming and?
Not at all.
No, and
No,
so
it would
we
not
would still
change.
continue with our partnership with East Meets West Festival that the chamber has.
Yeah. And based on the other recommendations in the plan, we would continue to outreach to other organizations to help with more programming. Whether those are religious organizations or, organizations that represent particular populations from other parts of the world. There's 2 or 3 of those in the area that work with us to rent facilities now and have activities and festivals. So those opportunities are there. We would continue to do that. We continue to reach out to those people. One thing that cultural resources very commonly, if you look at a definition of it, very often gets attached to departments who manage things like museums or manage things like historical facilities, huge battlegrounds, departments that handle things like, World War II ships and those kind of things. At the federal level, cultural resources deals more with, national historical sites. So it's a mixed term that's very often used for something totally different than, events and art and crafts. It's typically used for very different things.
So, like, for example, there's a Native American Cultural Resource Center. Mm-hmm. By way.
Yeah, my only thinking is, like, other than calling Parks and Recs, like I always call it Parks and Recs, as a, never call the full abbreviation, like full Parks and Recs. But when we change the name for the sake of changing the name, if anyone, a newcomer who's trying to search for it, and trying to do, like, is there something they want to do, a cultural collaboration or something other than Parks and Recs, does he have to go deep dive into it? Right. Does he have to go search, into the documents that can he collaborate into it? How does he, is it easy to understand for him? Yes, we still call it. Ever since I've been here, I've never called the full name of it. So I'll be very honest in how I interpret it. So that's the only reason. We call it. We were in the stormwater committee. So we call it. We never call it the whole name of it. And the new committee that merged, we still call it the old name that we go for it. Recycling and.
Right.
I mean, I think if we were to do if we were to have specific cultural resources X, then it would make sense. But then I'd like to see a cultural resources advisory committee, because we have a Parks and Rec committee, advisory committee.
Well, actually, the formal name of the committee is Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Advisory Committee. The acronym is PRCRAC.
So we're not spinning a new committee again for it. So that's
I think we've just answered the question. Less is more.
sounds like we're amenable to it, and
Less is more.
if we hear from the residents, we'll reconsider it. But at least now they know that might be coming.
It's a different way. We can deliver the message differently. So your input is important to the conversation before you ask the public.
Yeah, but it's somewhere the culture part has to be either on the website or something. We changing the name has no value, but the person who is coming in has to know that the culture part is attached to this Parks and Recs. By detaching the culture part, how does he know that? Is there a separate cultural department, or is it something. I know we understand there's a huge, big towns do different things, but we are all small town feeling. So where does he have to come?
Yeah.
That's all.
In the description, it could include cultural events. And stuff.
Right. And,
So the
yeah.
word will be in there on
Yeah.
the front page for Parks and Rec, I'd imagine.
Yeah. And you know, the consultants from PROS in the conversations about things when we talked about it, you know, it's like they said, in most communities, everybody calls it Parks and Recreation, but they know that's where all your events and programming come through. So it's become a common just assumption is how they referred to it.
I mean, I would suspect that if we were to walk around a mall and take a poll, they would probably call it Parks and Rec. I don't know that anybody would know the entire length of the name, but they would, like to your point, they would know to go there to find when we have Nepal Day.
I'm sure.
Did the Parks and Recreation Cultural Advisory Committee have any certain decision points or things that they thought were interesting or recommendations that
They will see this document next week, the draft, and
whole thing?
no,
Okay.
and they will go through a very similar exercise to what we're doing tonight, as far as going through and getting their feedback and questions and input at their next meeting,
Okay.
and that's next Wednesday.
And we're welcome to attend and be flies on the wall.
You're welcome to attend. The general public's welcome to attend. They are open to the public. We have a public comment section on their agenda, and so if there are members of the public who would like to come in and voice their opinion, they're welcome.
And we'll be having a public input session on ours on April 10th
Correct.
as part of our meeting. Does anyone else have any other thoughts while we have the consultant here? Any questions?
Do we need to go back to chapter 4 for anything?
Yes, my wife.
We've all gone back to chapter 4. There's something in chapter 4.
Okay. Ms. Cutter, did you have any final thoughts or things that we should keep in mind as we go through the next few steps of this process?
I don't think we're just excited to receive comments and any additional feedback so we can deliver a final product to you.
Yep. And just as a reminder to everyone and anyone who may be listening, as you can see on our next slide, this draft is posted online. We do have a public comment portal open, and we're holding that open until April 2nd. And we have it till April 2nd because after it closes, we want to comprise all those comments and have it in your briefing material for the April 10th meeting. So you'll be able to see those public comments also in combination with comments that come in that night. So that's why we picked the 2nd, so we could have the summary in your package for the April 10th meeting. We have started social media advertising. Stephanie and one of my staff are working together on that. We've put out those first couple of rounds, and we'll be doing more of those over the next 2 weeks. We sent emails last week to every email address that we had in our Parks and Recreation database. We have over 9,800 households in that database. So any email address that was in that database got an email last week that the plan is online. Encourage you to go online and give us your feedback. We also put signage at all of our playgrounds, picnic shelters, the aquatic center, Cedar Fork, either at the front door or right next to the sidewalks. There's a QR code on it you can scan with your phone if you want to just remind everybody that the opportunity is there. The advisory committee, as we mentioned, will review it on March 28th, and then the public open house will be here April 10th. And
So you say open house, so that'll be before the meeting?
yes, 4 to 6:30, and what we're planning is to have some large poster size maps and some of the pages here with recommendations and things posted in the back of the room so that the public can come in and look at those. We'll have a few copies of the hard copies out as well so that they can look at those. An opportunity during the meeting for them to make any comments that they would like. We'll also have, comment cards or things that they can write any comments on that they want to in case they can't stay for the meeting if they're coming through after school or whatever that may be, so that they can leave those with us and we'll make sure they get recorded. So, and obviously the feedback received during the process, either from tonight's meeting, the adjustments that we need to make, we'll be working on those. Feedback that we receive from the public, we'll be working on any adjustments, and then we'll bring you a revised draft at the April 24th meeting to consider. And, obviously, if council is ready at that meeting, at your discretion, you could approve it, or if you'd like us to put it back up for more public comment, we'd be glad to do so.
Okay. Any council members have any suggestions or thoughts about that outreach plan and the path forward? Sounds like we're getting lots of head nods, so that sounds like a great plan. Thank you, Mr. Allen. That was great.
Mr. Mayor, I just have one question, if you don't mind. Going back to Councilmember Schlink's comment about the potential for pocket parks in various communities, and just forgive me for this being my first time around, would the potential for those, because I know they don't physically exist anywhere except in our minds right now, would those go into this plan, or would they go into some other
revision? Or
would it be a future revision if we decided to do that? Or
do we identify
pocket parks,
opportunities for them?
That could be part of that green printing exercise we were talking about, but typically because they're smaller in nature, the opportunities for those will often come at the development point. If you have a subdivision coming in with 130 homes, for example, we'll look at that and do that calculation by our ordinance. They would owe us about 1.8 acres.
Right. But like Providence Place, for example, has an HOA that has land that could be
with the town. Jerry's aware of it.
So would that be in here, or would that be?
Well, now we have to assess those opportunities as they come, because very often, if that land was required dedication under the UDO as an open space, we have to always analyze that. We can't go in and change that use. Sometimes the land that may be in an area, an easement of some type that would affect our ability to improve it. Power lines, gas lines, things of that nature. Those utilities typically are very restrictive on what you can do in those easements. So we'll have to analyze any of those opportunities to see where we may be able to add, a 2-acre park here or there.
So from a budgeting perspective, is that something that we would just add down the road versus planning for it now? Or I'm still trying to learn the process.
I think in your scenario, Kids Creek, I think whatever land's developable, I think if planning in your department want to work with them to try and do something like that, the developer. Mm-hmm. And then with the other area, with the airport noise overlay, I think those we could put inside the plan.
Yeah.
The greenways.
And then like Providence Place.
And Providence Place, I think, the HOA owns that, and I think they, as a separate group, want to approach the town about it, seeing what they can do, because they actually own the land. Mm-hmm. So they would donate it over, or whatever they have to do in conjunction with.
And that's part of the analysis that I'm referring to. The land that they've asked about is directly under the Duke Power easement. And so there would be some restriction to what we could build there.
But the greenway's already there.
Right, the greenway's there on the opposite side.
Volleyball court that they're interested in offering, that sand volleyball court.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what you have to remember too is it's not just an initial, it's all of the care and maintenance. And so, for example, a sand volleyball court would then require some ongoing regular maintenance, and there's liability. There's not a simple answer to give us some land. It's, as Jerry mentioned, you have to analyze all the issues for every specific instance that there might be. Yeah. If Providence Place is interested in offering this land to the town for something, pun intended, I guess the ball's in their court first to offer that to us, that then we could respond.
And the other, there's always especially in a developed community, there's always the question of once it becomes a pocket park, it becomes a public park. Right. And whatever those amenities are now going to be opened up for use by a much wider population, and especially if it's a specialty use like a volleyball court that we may not have at another park. You're going to increase traffic through that neighborhood. Where are they going to park? You're going to increase foot traffic and people through that neighborhood. So there's always those questions you have to look at. Is the site large enough to support that?
So we just talked about a scenario where somebody may offer up land and donate it to the town. But if we came across a piece of land that we could purchase, right, there's parkland payment in lieu funds that we could tap into. There
are.
Right.
Yeah, for now. Now, remember Remember, the recommendation in here is for us to take a harder look at developments and look at taking land, the parkland payment in lieu funds that are there. That's how those were generated from money that was given in the past. Once that money is used on your next park or your next park after that, it's gone. If we start looking now at, instead of taking 3 acres from a developer, the land value of that, if we start taking 3 acres for a pocket park, now we have to find the money to go in there and improve it. And so there's a discussion to be had at the council level of, how do you handle that in the future? Do you handle it as the opportunity comes up and now you have to work it into your budget? Or do you talk about setting up a separate fund that you go ahead and start putting money into as a future development fund? And that could either be for future development or for acquisition for when that 2-acre spot pops up. You already have money set aside that you can use that.
So then, if we were to have land instead of the payment in lieu, then that land in a development, would that become a park just for that development, or would that become a town-owned park?
It's a town-owned public facility.
So then, but we would have hopefully enough that we'd be able to plan for the parking and then plan for infrastructure so it wouldn't completely disrupt the community that was living in there.
Right, and that is
right.
Northwest Park.
And that's part of that analysis that I was talking about.
Okay, I just wanted to understand it.
Our ratio for land dedication is 1/35 of an acre per dwelling unit. So
How much is it?
1/35 of an acre per dwelling unit. So every 35 homes turns into an acre of land. So if you've got a 70-unit development, you've got 2 acres. So you have to get up into over 100 or more typically to get a piece of land that is developable. And now you have to remember, when you take out that 2 acres or that 3 acres, now you just took 10 homes or 12 homes out of that development. So now that number just went down. So you have to have a large enough development to make the land size developable and usable. So, and when that works, it's great. But if it's a 40-unit, 60-unit, 70-unit development, now you take out 2 acres, it's down to a 50-unit development. Yeah, well, no, that's all part of the analysis that we have to do as part of the development process.
That's why the greenways are effective in connecting the greenways so people
right.
can get there.
Right. But it does become a public park, and just as we did when we developed the plan for Northwest Park, we made sure to put in a parking lot so that people who do drive in to use it aren't parking in the street, aren't parking in front of a neighbor's driveway. They have a parking lot that they can use.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think we're good on this item. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Ms. Cotter, very much. Will we be seeing you again, or?
Probably at one of the other meetings, the advisory board meeting or the public input. So there's a few more things I'll be attending.
Thank you again for coming out and presenting tonight. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Our next item is item 2B. You guys want to take a quick 5-minute break? We're going to take a quick 5-minute break now. Please reconvene at 8:20. And then we'll move on to our next item, financial advisor update, debt capacity discussion. Thank you. 8:24, we're going to bring us back into session now. Our next item is financial advisor update, debt capacity discussion, Davenport and Company, Town of Morrisville. We're going to have Nancy Emsley get us started on this.
Alrighty. Thank you, and good evening. It's as you know, Davenport and Company serves as the town's financial advisors. They have prepared for you an update regarding our debt capacity and our affordability. Their presentation will include proposed capital projects that we are working on, potential funding sources for McCrimmon Parkway, Phase 2, the Aquatic Fitness Center, the Morrisville Carpenter Road project, and they'll also be talking about how we might use general obligation bonds, 2/3 bonds, and installment financing as possible funding sources. In addition, they're going to illustrate the difference between declining budget and a fixed budget regarding how we can, with our debt service, and regarding how it affects our capacity, our affordability, and while keeping us all in compliance with what our town policies are. And so at this point, I would like to turn things over to both Ted Cole and Mitch Bergoglio, and they are here from Davenport and Company to talk with us this evening.
All right. Thank you. Good evening. I think what's going to be on the screen is exactly what you have in front of you. I think you have a copy in front of you, right? Because there are certain slides you'll need the hard copy. Again, I'm Ted Cole. Mitch Bergoglio is my colleague, and we're going to walk through this, and I would love to have your questions along the way if you've got questions. And as Nancy said, we've been working with the town for a number of years on capital planning, oftentimes culminates in debt issuance and bond rating processes, and we're going to kind of walk through these topics as she laid out. So page numbers are in the lower right-hand corner. We're going to start with your existing tax-supported debt profile, and we're going to talk about bond ratings on page 2. And in the upper right-hand corner, we have the rating scales from the 3 national rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, and you all are a triple. You're a AAA from all 3 rating agencies, so you have achieved the highest rating possible for a local government from all 3 agencies, and that was done in August of 2016, where all 3 of them either affirmed or moved you to that AAA level. So there is no higher bond rating that you all can achieve. One of the things that you're going to see in pieces of this presentation is some comparisons to other rated cities and towns, and we subscribe to a database that Moody's maintains. And we're going to look at 2 groups. We're going to look at cities and towns nationally, those that are rated AAA. There are 219 of those, one of which is you all. And we're going to compare you also to the 2 rating categories just beneath you, AA1 and AA2. And then we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to focus just on North Carolina cities and towns. So there are 11 cities and towns in North Carolina that are rated AAA, again, one of which is you all. 10 that are AA1s, and 16 that are AA2s. So we're talking about the 3 highest rating categories, all very, very, very high level of ratings, and just again to give you some perspective as we move through some of these comparisons and ratios.
Ted, I have a quick question. Was there some 4th rating agency? Didn't we once also note that we had a 4th rating agency that did us well, or am I misremembering?
Retreat visit.
Yeah, I don't believe you've ever had another rating. There is another entity out there that has started in the national rating agency called Kroll. Not widely used. They're fairly young in their existence. And years ago, there used to be something called the North Carolina Municipal Council. Okay. They gave a numerical rating. They are no longer in existence. So I'm not sure what that may have been, one of those 2. Tax-supported debt that's in place today, and this is through and including the bonds that we issued in 2016. Outstanding, you have about $19.3 million outstanding as of the close of the last fiscal year. Almost $18 million of that is general obligation bonds, and you had a small amount of non-general obligation bonds or installments, about $1.6 million. You can see graphically by fiscal year what your annual payments are, principal and interest, starting with fiscal year 18 through 37. Everything that's on the books today will be retired by 2037. And you can see you've got a nice declining debt service structure as different bond issues roll off and pay off. And that's going to be a key tool that we're going to look at as we move forward in terms of helping to afford the next piece of debt, whatever that might be, as you're paying down your existing debt, creating capacity for new debt. On the right-hand side of this page, page 3, we've got principal, interest, and total payments on a fiscal year basis, so you can see what you're paying on this tax-supported debt year over year, about $2.1 million, $2.2 million this year, fiscal 18, and you can see it stepping down over time. Everything that you have in place today is fixed rate debt. The payments we know to the penny. They're not going to change unless you proactively look to change them or refinance or refund them. One of the first key debt ratios we look at is on the far right column. It's called 10-year payout ratio. What we're measuring there is a forward-looking 10-year period with just your existing debt, and we're looking at the principal. How much of that $19 million in principal will be paid back 10 years from now? Higher is better. Generally indicates that you're amortizing your debt more quickly. You're not backloading the debt. So you're at about 67, 68% on a 10-year payout ratio today. That is, 10 years from now, 68% of that principal will have been repaid. Okay?
And then just quickly, our policy is?
You have a policy that says, that's right, that you will not fall below 55%. And you'll see that on page 4. Keep it, and it's the red line there. It's at 55%. And we look at this in the aggregate. We don't look at any one bond issue by itself. We look at it in the aggregate. And if you think about it, maintaining or having a minimum level of that, we're not going to fall below that. The idea being one of the easiest ways to make a payment or a debt issue more affordable is to stretch it out or to backload it, and this keeps you from doing that to excess. So what you'll see in those green bars on the left is over time, as your debt is maturing, your 10-year payout ratio is getting stronger and stronger, approaching 100%. You do have a policy. And then on the upper right, we've got the comparative. You all are in gold. In the gold bar there, that's your ratio, in this case, call it 67%. And then for the national cities and towns, AAA, AA1, AA2, as well as the North Carolinas, in those green bars, we're showing you the medians. So if there are 50, or I think, let's say 200 national AAAs, half of them are going to be higher than this bar and half of them will be lower. It's the median. So you're at 67%, just a hair below the medians, but certainly in a very reasonable range for your rating category. We could drill down a little bit further and look at what the high and low is for any one of these, and you'll see on the high end there will be people that have a 100% 10-year payout ratio, meaning in the next 10 years all of their debt will be retired, and there are others in this grouping that will have payout ratios that might be at 50% or below. It kind of runs the gamut. And when we start talking about ratings and credit worthiness, while that, if somebody's at 50% or below, maybe that's a particular weakness for them, but they offset that with other areas of strength. So no one of these ratios is necessarily going to drive the rating. But you're in really good shape on this particular ratio and the policy. The next key debt ratio, and you also have a policy here, is debt to assessed value. So we're measuring that $19 million of debt as a percent of your tax base. All right, you got a tax base of about $4.6 billion. We're talking about $19 million on $4.6 billion. We are growing. We're assuming that the tax base is growing at 3% per year. When we do the math, your ratio is less than 0.5 of 1%, 0.4%. So the debt, as a percent of the tax base, it's declining over time because we're paying the debt down, but we're also assuming the tax base is growing. In this case, lower is better. You have a policy that says we will not exceed 2%. Again, you're well below that. And on a comparative basis, you compare very favorably. Remember, in this particular ratio, lower is better. So you are well below the AAA medians for both national and North Carolina cities and towns. And in the Moody's scoring, you rank in what they consider the very strong category.
The one that we see in Morrisville, I'm trying to get that graph.
Your page behind.
I know, but I'm trying.
Okay, there you go.
I'm trying to understand, the payout ratio versus the debt to assess from the peer comparative. We are a little less compared to the national median, right? From the other graphs that you are showing, and I'm trying to flip the other charts, but. Might not be now, but is there a kind of a user case? It's kind of new to me, but what is the difference between take a loan that you take on a AAA versus a triple AA1 versus AA2? How does that
difference in the interest rates?
How does it change?
Well. Whether you're AAA, a AA1, AA2, or even in the single A, very low-rated investment grade, the way you structure the debt, you all have the same opportunities to structure the debt the exact same way. Where we find the differential is the interest rate that's assigned, driven by either the higher rating or the lower rating.
So yeah, exactly. So and how much difference does it really give? So as a user case, as a lean business case, because that's the critical thing for me to understand. You know, this is good, but I wanted to see if I can follow a pattern.
Yeah, and
how it would be, because that's kind of a person I am.
Sure. No, I understand, and the bond market, the municipal bond market that you would be selling into, you don't go anywhere and find an indice of what is a Morrisville 20-year bond trade at, or what is a City of Clinton bond trade at. The difference between the borrowing rate for a AAA borrower versus a AA versus a single A varies. And in different interest rate environments, that difference can be wider. And in lower interest rates environments, that difference can be much tighter. So there is no direct correlation. It's very difficult to measure. But oftentimes when we have this conversation, for a AAA borrower like yourselves and somebody borrowing who's the next rating below you, let's say that might be the difference between borrowing at 3% versus 3.1%, 10 basis points. That's a reasonable estimate for what the difference might be between a AAA and a AA borrower. But it's not uniform, it's not published, you're not going to find that empirically in any tables. It's really the bond market. What we track is interest rates, but they're based on bond trades that occur in the market, and there isn't a uniform index that people go to in trading bonds and assigning interest rates. But I mean, there is absolutely a correlation to higher bond rating, lower borrowing rate, but how much, to what extent, it varies.
And it's very important to get, I know the town worked very hard to get to that rating too. So that's okay.
Well, based on these policies, which they've helped us with.
Okay.
Yeah. That 55% was
So,
a 10-year payout.
So, yeah, the question I had was with regard to the town policies. What our policy is versus the national average. Are we right where everybody's at? Are we more conservative than? Are we more progressive than?
You mean the national average for other policies, or national average for other ratios?
Yeah, what we said our policies are.
Yeah, the policies were set a number of years ago, and it was a process of sort of finding and striking the balance between, let's establish a policy that's going to be meaningful, that we're going to get benefit from, say, from the rating agencies or other lenders. But we also set it at a level that acknowledged that there will be things that you all need to do moving forward that require debt. So we found that balance. What I would tell you on the actual absolute levels, whether it's the 10-year payout ratio, the debts to assessed value or debt service to expenditures, these ratio policy limits, I would say, are very consistent with the vast majority of local governments we see, particularly in North Carolina. You get to some other states, things are a little bit different, but in North Carolina in particular, most all local governments that have policies operate within a relative range of one another, and I think these are pretty representative of what you would see for most any other policy.
So, yeah, so getting back to, you say the municipalities or towns in North Carolina, does it lean nationally conservative, or does it lean middle of the road, or does it lean?
North Carolina tends to be a more conservative state when we look at local government finance, and in a number of ways, and debt included. There's, for one, there's the Local Government Commission, which is an entity underneath the state treasurer that provides, some additional guidance that it does not exist in other states. But generally speaking, yeah, I think North Carolina, don't hold me to this, but I believe that North Carolina ranks in one of the top states nationally in terms of the number of AAA communities that are in that state. So I think that just is a testament that it's really a very well-run state from a local government finance perspective, and we tend to see cities and towns in North Carolina that have a lower debt burden than many other states.
Okay, thank you.
For example, I think Wake County's AAA also, one of the few counties in the country that's AAA.
That's right, and we typically, when we look at the AAA comparisons, we're looking specifically at cities and towns. There are 9 AAA counties in North Carolina, Wake County being one, but when you start comparing cities and counties, you lose some comparability. Obviously, their debt levels are at a much higher level, predominantly driven by schools. And so what we typically do if we're working on this with a county is we compare them to other counties because there are similar structures and similar responsibilities. And when we're looking at cities and towns, we look at them because, again, their responsibilities. You go to other states, counties aren't responsible for public schools. They have independent school districts that have taxing authority, that have debt issuance authority. So even from state to state, if you're looking at counties, you can lose a little bit of comparability. So when we're looking at these comparatives, it is just cities and towns, not counties. Okay? I just wanted to make one other point on the question about the bond rating. If you look at the scale in its entirety, and remember, we're focusing on just the 3 highest rating categories, where we see the real divergence of borrowing rates is when you drop out of the AA category into the single A category. That's where we see the interest rates required by investors really taking a step up. So AAA and AA are pretty close to one another in terms of the rates at which they borrow. When you fall into that single A category, that's where you see a wider diversion or a spread in terms of higher interest rates. All right, last policy I wanted to cover on page 6 is debt service versus expenditures. So if you recall, on your existing debt, you're paying about $2 million a year on a budget in the governmental funds of give or take $24 million. Your debt service to expenditures is about 8.5%, and it's declining over time. Again, it's declining over time because you're paying down your debt. Your payments are going lower every year, but we've also assumed a growth rate in your budget. In this particular case, you have a policy that says it won't exceed 15%. That's a pretty standard policy. And you can see you're well below that at 8.5%, 9%. So there is capacity within that policy to be talking about additional debt. It doesn't mean it's affordable, but there is capacity there, right? And those are 2 concepts we talk about, is the capacity to take on debt within your policies. So with this policy, the one we just looked at, you're below your policy. There is capacity to take on additional debt and still be in compliance with your policy, still be able to demonstrate a strong financial profile, and still be able to show that you line up in a relatively, similar fashion to your rated peers. But that doesn't necessarily mean the repayment of that debt service is affordable, and that's what we're going to talk about here in a moment. But your debt service to expenditures on page 6, you're in compliance with your policy. Lower is better here, and you can see on the comparatives, you are right on the medians, a little bit below your North Carolina AAA peers. Lower is better. I can tell you, because I looked at this the other day, within that North Carolina AAA median for debt service to expenditures, remember, half of the units are above and below, half are below. I think the high number on this was just a bit over 15%. So, again, you're talking about a pretty wide range, but you're really right on the median, which is an indicator that you line up at an appropriate level with your rating category. Okay? You'll need to.
So for the debt service to expenditures, the maximum for North Carolina AAA is actually last year bumped up to 20.5%, and the minimum was like 6%. So there's a high range there. You all
6 to 20% high, low to high there. You'll need to look at your book on page 7. This is where we transition to debt affordability. And again, what we're talking about here is just your existing debt. There's no new debt anticipated. And this is funding scenario A, and you'll see the bullet point at the top. Our debt service appropriation is matched annually to the debt service requirement. That'll make sense in a moment. As you look from left to right, everything is on a fiscal year basis, starting with the current fiscal year 18. Column B is all of the debt that's in place today that was issued just prior to our 2016 bonds. And then column C is the debt service associated with the 2016 bonds that we issued, the $10 million. So we've just shown those separately so we can sort of track them. That'll make some sense in a moment. But when you push them together, that is the existing tax-supported debt schedule that we looked at earlier. Columns D, E, and F are placeholders for what might be new debt moving forward related to your capital program. There's nothing in there for the time being. G is where we're adding B and C together. So G is essentially your existing tax-supported debt payments that we saw earlier on the other page. The middle of the page, columns H through L, are the revenues that you all have identified in your debt service budget. Okay? And what you're going to see is that column H is starting at $1.3 million. By design, that is exactly what the payment due under column B is for fiscal 18, $1.3 million. But you'll see that H then steps down every year, lockstep with column B, okay? So we are essentially demonstrating here that your annual appropriation for all of that debt in column B is going to reduce year over year as the payments reduce, okay? J and K are the columns where you are capturing additional revenues from two different tax increases that you implemented related to your GO bonds. One in FY14 for 2 pennies and one in FY16 for 2 pennies. So at the end of the day, the way that this model assumes your budgeting is you essentially have 3 streams of revenue. You've got a general fund appropriation under column H, and that is declining over time. And then we've got J and K, which is where we've isolated 2 different 2-cent tax increases that have been done. And so all of those revenue sources are summed up in column L. And then what we do is we look at the payments due under G, the revenues available under L, and we compare them to one another under column M as in Michael. And what you're going to see is every year M is positive. We have more dollars flowing through this debt service budget than we have payments due. And that is setting us up nicely for the next conversation, which is what else do you have to do moving forward? Okay? And right now what our model is doing is it's taking the surpluses in column M and it's just accumulating them over in the far right. Okay? For the time being. Again, we're about to introduce some new debt service that will be changing that, but for the time being, it's being accumulated over in the far right. Okay? And the key takeaway here is J and K are constant. Those are 2 cents per column every year, and we are growing those 2 cents. The value of a penny is growing by 3% a year. That's tied to natural growth in your tax base. We've talked with staff about that. We looked back. We felt like that was a good assumption. I think it's consistent with some other general planning assumptions you've made as it relates to tax base and budget. But H is the column that is actually stepping down every year. We want to look at a slightly different model on page 8. The only thing that's different is column H is constant. It's not stepping down. it stays at that $1,345,000 a year. And everything else is exactly the same. And at the end of the day, what that means is there are greater surpluses being accumulated over in column M and R. There are more dollars that are being captured and maintained in this debt service budget than the prior page. And that's going to be a decision point for you all moving forward as you start talking about the next phase of capital, what other debt might you need or want to do, and is one of these models sufficient to provide the dollars for that new debt, or is this model that we're on here, I mean, it certainly creates more dollars available to you. It's just a question of how much will you need, and that reducing column H, obviously that's freeing up dollars for other places in your budget. And so this is a decision point that you will be thinking about. We're going to explore both of these for you in a moment about what kind of future debt capacity does each of these provide you. But that's the main difference.
So the question I have is, when was this report run?
It was run within the last week.
Okay. So when I see this 2018 and then I see 2019, so for purposes for Jeannie, we are going on the 2019 budget, right? When I see this 2100946, that's the surplus that we will be having, and then 994 is the one from last year. I'm trying to see what's the surplus that we will be getting.
This is a model. This isn't dollars in our budget. This is a model.
So then what am I looking at then? It's a model.
We can get capacity if we wanted to do more projects
Yes.
down the road.
But
There's two different scenarios. There's a payoff here, or a fork. There's a fork.
So, but the 2018, for example, that's already a previous model, right? So it's already done.
It's the same model that they're just carrying forward using the same assumptions as what we're using in 2018.
So that
And
is
what
not
would build.
So that's not our fund balance. That's
Correct.
the change in fund balance from these. We're not starting from a set fund balance.
So not what's currently there. So I'm just trying to see.
That's correct. It shows you what could be.
But not
what is.
What is. So that's what I wanted to be correct. That's the reason I said, when did you run that?
Yeah, we're in both models. The FY18 number's the same. So we're about to close. We're about to get to the end of fiscal year 18. I would expect there'll be about $900,000 at the end of 18 that both of these models show, because of the payments that you made that year and the revenues that you budgeted that year. But in the years beyond that, it's going to be a function of what other projects do you fund and how do you...
That's where I was getting to.
Yeah. Okay? So, again, two different approaches to budgeting for debt service moving forward. So now we're going to transition to potential new projects on page 10, and I'll start on the left. Again, we have accounted for in your existing debt the $10 million of debt that we issued in 2016 for McCrimmon Parkway. That's done. That is already included in our existing debt model. What we then lay out is a series of additional projects, the first being phase 2 for McCrimmon Parkway, estimated at $5.3 million. Our understanding is the money is due to, I guess that's an NCDOT project. They're managing that project. The money is due to them from the town 60 days after construction is completed. And there are two sources of funding for your obligation to that project. $1 million that you have available from the 2016 bonds, and then the remaining authorization that you have for streets of $4.3 million. That $4.3 million was voted, approved, but you haven't issued it yet. So between those two, the $1 million that you have from the 2016 borrowing a new $4.3 million borrowing that we would need to do. That's the $5.3 that you would need to make available to NCDOT when that project's complete. Okay?
So when you say 2018 voted, I think that might confuse people if we call that more issued or to be issued, because we didn't vote on a bond.
Yeah, I mean, you voted on it, I guess, a few years ago. 2012, that might be.
We just want to make it more clear for the residents.
Sure.
Sort of.
Yeah, those are bonds that were voted in 2012 that will be issued in fiscal year 18.
Okay. We don't want to tell people
we'll clean that up.
We're asking them to vote on a bond.
Yeah, are they issued in FY18?
They're going to be issued, actually, I misspoke, FY19.
FY19.
19 because it's June.
That's when we're going to let them and collect the money from them.
Do you always wait that long to sell the bonds? Is that just a standard process?
Sell them when you need them.
Between now and then? It's largely driven by the LGC in terms of when they have everything they need and want to authorize it. So I misspoke. These will be issued in FY19, calendar year 18. So that's phase 2 of McCrimmon. The next project down is the Aquatics and Fitness Center. We're using an estimate there of $6.7 million. We have 2 sources of funding for that. Bonds that have already been voted that we would, based on the current schedule, we would assume are going to be issued in calendar year 18 of $5.7 million. And then a remaining need of about $1 million that could be funded through an installment financing. So it's still debt. It's just not GO debt. It's some installment debt. Oftentimes it's placed directly with banks. You all have done that from time to time over the years for certain projects.
So Nancy, that would be the example of the public safety radios is the most recent time that we used that. Okay.
That's right. So between general obligations of 5.7 and an installment financing of about $1 million, that would provide the $6.7 million for that project. And then finally, we have Morrisville Carpenter Road, a little over $9 million. Again, summer, early fall of 18. 3 different funding sources. The first being a LAP grant that's estimated at $6.3 million. The second is what we call 2/3 GO bonds. That is something that is unique to North Carolina. It is essentially a calculation that is done that says in any given year, if you look at how much principal of general obligation debt you have paid back or retired, and you can issue 2/3 of that amount in new GO debt without a vote. It's an authorized issuance process under statute. So keep it easy, if you were reducing your annual general obligation debt at $3 million per year, every year, you could do $2 million of 2/3 bonds without a voter referendum. Now, in your case, with the way your existing debt is paying back, your capacity into the 2/3 bonds is about $750,000. So that is an option that you have available to you to go and issue some additional general obligation debt for this project that would provide about $750,000 of funding.
And we would do that because the interest rate would be more attractive if we
for the general obligation versus some alternative.
Versus
that's
an
correct.
installment. Right.
And then the last component to that would be, like the fitness center, a $2 million installment financing. So between the LAP grant, the 2/3 GO capacity, and an installment, that's the $9 million that would provide the funding for that project. So those are the identified projects and related debt issuances that we've been working on with staff. And you'll see on the right-hand side very high-level assumptions of the timing, the amounts, the interest rates, and payments. So essentially we're talking in general obligation debt, about $10.7 million that would be issued in the fall of 18, which is fiscal year 19, a 20-year term. level principal is the sort of the standard structure. What that means is every year you make the same principal payment. When you look at interest, what you see is the first year of payments is the highest and it declines over time. That's the local government commission's preferred approach. It's the way you all have typically issued GO debt historically, and it provides for a nice decline in your debt structure. We're using a 5% interest rate, which is above current market. If you were in the market today, you'd be 3.25% fixed for 20 years. So this is certainly a higher interest rate, but trying to put a little bit of conservatism in this, and we're watching interest rates. They have been edging up, but I would hope even when we get to the fall of 18, we'd be able to come in below that 5% rate.
So coming to the interest rate, being a government entity, do you have any special stake on the table because with the AAA rating and being a government agency to get a lower interest rate, or you're pretty much on the same table as any other person getting the same interest rate?
I think I understand your question. And the way that the general obligation bonds are issued in North Carolina, the local government commission actually sells those on your behalf, and they take bids in a competitive process on a day and time specific, and you award the bonds to the bidder with the lowest interest rate. But I think that might.
I mean, so that's what I'm asking. So there's pretty much you just pick the lowest one. That's all it is. So there's nothing like you can choose that particular person, right? Or there's a.
It's there. The bids are received typically from underwriting firms.
Okay.
And it's done on an electronic bidding platform, and there is a very specific calculation that goes into how the bids are summarized and calculated, and you're obligated to award it to the lowest interest rate. And the local government commission, again, kind of oversees that process on your behalf.
I'm sorry, so if we were at a single A or a B rating, the interest rates that would come in would be naturally higher.
Correct.
So we're going to get the lowest of the AAA. So being AAA is going to give us exactly that.
Yes.
So we're not going to get any added discount or.
Right. No, I mean, there's your AAA, so you can't get a better bond rating. But then people will look at things and say, Morrisville doesn't come to the market all that often, whereas Wake County comes all the time. And so you might find that there's some people that can be a little more aggressive on your bonds because there's not a lot of them out there. They don't own a lot of your bonds. And so sometimes you have investors that are willing to be a little more aggressive for your bonds because it helps in the diversification of their portfolio. They already own a lot of Mecklenburg County and Wake County, and this is an opportunity to buy a name that isn't all that frequent in the market, and that can be to your advantage.
Thank you.
And then in addition to the GO bonds, we've got the $3 million of installments. So it's $1 million for the fitness center and $2 million for Morrisville Carpenter, $3 million combined. And so the thought process would be, if all of these projects are aligning themselves in terms of being designed, engineered, and bid, that's the big thing for the local government commission in Raleigh, is they want to know that when you are borrowing money, that you are borrowing money based on good project costs. And they get comfortable when the projects are bid and you have real costs in hand versus estimates. But if all of these things come together on this track, what we're looking at is funding all of this debt at approximately the same time, late summer, early fall of 18. Payments would begin in fiscal 19, not full year payments, but interest payments. And then you'll see in a moment those payments, payments would begin in fiscal 20. And so they're not a fiscal 19 consideration for you all. We're talking about fiscal 20 for the first payments. From there, we've run a couple of cases, and we've run each of them under those different funding scenarios, A and B. Remember, funding scenario A is where that one column is stepping down every year. From $1.3 million, it steps down, whereas funding scenario B, it's held flat at the $1.3 million. At the top of this page 11, case 1, what we're doing is we are modeling up debt, starting with those projects we just discussed, and we are maximizing the debt issuances such that we solve for no additional tax increases needed to fund the debt, and that we maintain compliance with our policies. So essentially what we're measuring is, if we're going to do the projects we just discussed, how much more can we do that won't trigger a tax increase and that will allow us to continue to be in compliance with our policies. And then case 2, we've done the exact same thing, except we've eliminated the tax increase restriction. We've said, how much can we do and be in compliance with our policy? So we're kind of showing you two bookends there. And case 2, you'll see, will have some tax impacts. All of this comes together on 12. You'll definitely need your book. And if you just bear with me, I'll get you oriented to this page. We have case 1A and 1B side by side, and case 2A and 2B side by side. Remember, the difference between A and B is that one column of revenue that you make available for debt service. A is where it starts at $1.3 million and steps down, and B is where it's $1.3 million every year. And then case 1 is we're going to issue, if you look, going down case 1A, level principal, 20 years at 5%. We've talked about that. We're borrowing the 10.7 of GOs, the $3 million of installments. And then what you'll see on line 10 under 1A, this scenario will support another $4.5 million of debt that you could issue as early as fiscal year 19. And remember, this is the case where there is no additional tax revenue needed, and we're in compliance with our policies. So what this case 1A is saying is you could do a total of about $18.3 million of debt over the next out to 2024. And you can do it within the confines of your current debt budget, no new revenues needed, and your policies are all intact. Okay? Right next to that, case 1B, we've done the exact same thing. The only difference is that debt service appropriation is flat at $1.3 million. There's more dollars flowing through that model. And you'll see that picks up an incremental $6 to $6.5 million of debt capacity in this period of time. Again, no additional tax revenues or revenues of any sort needed for this debt, and your policies are all intact. So the difference between those two budgeting approaches equates to approximately, on line 16, $6 million of debt issued over this period of time. Okay?
Question though, right? I mean, you said it. You can't issue this debt without projects that have price tags.
Correct. So what that other $4 million, you got to figure that out.
For the town, can we do, if we wanted projects, we couldn't come up with them in a year.
Right. And so if you don't issue it in 19, you would have it in 20 or 21. So this does not assume anything about what you might fund with that or the exact timing, but it gives you an idea of, in addition to the 10.7 and the 3, under your current debt budgeting approach, or two different debt budgeting approaches, is there some more capacity or affordability that you could be thinking about utilizing? And A is about $4.5 million of additional beyond the projects we've discussed, and the other one is, about $9 million. Okay.
Following? Yep, I got it.
I like how you round up.
Yeah.
Well, 8.4, and then you go down to the 865.
But I guess for 1B, it has a lot of cash flow implications, the fact that we're paying 1.3 every year. So that's why we have the capacity for issuance later, is that?
Correct. You're holding that $1.3 million a year in that debt budget. It's not available for whatever other purposes you might.
Kind of the trade-off there.
It's the trade-off, no doubt. And then 2A and 2B, the same approach, but we have lifted the tax increase restriction on ourselves. So you can see that there's significantly more debt that can be issued over this time horizon on line 16, about $39 million worth of debt. All of your policies would be in compliance. Your debt service to expenditure policy is the limiting factor on line 25. That peaks out at 15%. That's your policy. That's where we stopped. Your other policies have a little more room to run. And what you'll also see down below is debt of this magnitude over this period of time will require somewhere on line 37, somewhere between the equivalent of 2.5 and 3.5 pennies on the tax rate. You don't need that all up front. You'll see that it actually kind of occurs over a number of years. But in sum, on line 37, those debt scenarios would require over that horizon the equivalent of about 2.5 to 3.5 pennies worth of revenue. Or you could do a more front-loaded tax rate adjustment there on line 39 and 40 and actually do a little less of a tax. The idea there being if you need 2.5 pennies over 6 years, if you got 1.5 pennies up front, you can minimize the tax impact because you're getting some money earlier than you need it, you're holding it in the debt budget, and you're using it later. So it's just two different potential strategies if you were headed down that path of needing to consider a tax rate adjustment to support debt. You might consider raising taxes over time as needed, or you might consider doing something earlier that might minimize the overall impact.
So is this tax rating taking into consideration what our the development and population would be? Is it looking at the...
Where that ties in is we are assuming that every penny on your tax rate is generating today $460,000, and it's growing by 3% a year. So the value of the penny is growing by 3% a year tied to growth in your tax base. If you have more growth than that, a penny should be worth more. If you have less growth than that, the penny won't be worth quite as much. So when we show you that's this many pennies on the tax rate, what we're really getting to is it's creating that kind of dollars every year to support the debt. So there is essentially long-winded way of saying a 3% growth rate in your tax base.
And is 3% conservative? I think that seems very conservative.
Over time, that is what we've been experiencing.
The last decade.
Yes.
And we don't that.
Which is a really good growth.
That was it.
Questions?
Let's go shopping.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that case 2A and 2B are kind of more of a Kannapolis, very aggressive. We don't have something like that on our plate right now. Or do we? There's TOD, there's public works facility, there's the rest of the town center. So this is really just nice to have, to know that this is our capability. But we have some hard decisions about what we want to do and what our goals are.
This is to inform your decision-making process.
Yeah, and this is a scenario we can look at every year too.
Correct.
It's not, this is something to think about in the future. And there's a way to, here we're talking about tax increases here. If you had a bond referendum and went out and asked the public for a tax increase for X, that's a potential to kind of put into these scenarios too that we're not even talking about. So,
and that worked well in 2012.
It worked very well. It has worked well every bond we've done since I've been here. Yeah.
You turned it on. Did you want to say something else?
Just getting ready to. No, I think that what I like is that it shows capacity, and I agree. I think there's multiple ways to attack certain things, but it certainly gives us the potential ability to do things now rather than waiting for the next multiple years to make something happen. If there's something specific that we all agreed that we wanted to have, it gives us some capital.
Right, but again, remember, if we did this tomorrow, we still couldn't float it'd take over a year to float the bonds, and then we'd have to get contracts in hand with bids saying that this is what it is before. And as you can tell, that's what's happened in the past. We started this process in 2012. We're getting here.
Would this be where
due diligence in doing it right?
Is this where we would, if we were going to land bank, is this where we would purchase land from?
So again, this is just your capacity. All of the discussion about what things you might want to spend money on are really part of your CIP. We're going to be layering on to this topic of discussion next week with your CIP and budget preview. So it's very contextually relevant. This is just capacity. It's not tied to anything at this point, but it will help you as we try to move forward towards that long-range CIP plan, the things you have to talk about, sort of in relation to what Councilmember Schlink, even to schedule a bond referendum takes almost a year of paper. So timing is very important to all of these decisions.
And I think time is of the essence. And let me be a little bit more clear in what I was asking, Town Manager. What types of things could we purchase with this? Is land one of them?
Yes. So all kinds of factors associated with collateral, et cetera. That this is why we have financial advisors. They help us with some of those strategic decisions. Debt, it doesn't matter what kind of debt it is as it counts against your debt capacity. So we have to be strategic in those kinds of discussions as well.
But, general obligation bonds that go to the voters are different than the installment debt.
Correct.
And that's something that we could do in a quicker way, but we could also choose not to do that, and we could use fund balance, for example.
That's right.
Which was one of the options.
Pay as you go is part of
we didn't do, but that's something. We have $3 million that are on the schedule. So you said that none of this is tied to anything, but the $13 million is sort of tied to.
I'm talking about capacity. The future capacity is not encumbered at this point. What Mr. Cole provided is all the debt we have is covered. That's covered. So it's future capacity for other things that this is trying to illustrate for you. In addition to general obligation bonds that have to be voted on and backed by the full faith and credit of, they would force you to raise your tax increase if you weren't paying your debt. You have other debt obligation bonds that do not require voters. So there's a menu of options, and we have to be strategic in our choices.
And it just shows that over the last decade or so, that this town council, past councils since 2008 when there was the downturn, been very, very safe and conservative with our money, and we're in a very good position because of that. So we're fortunate in that way.
But we've gotten a lot done.
And we've gotten a lot done.
That's true.
Yeah, absolutely, a lot.
That's because the economy turned around too.
Yeah.
Some towns are more aggressive. We haven't been that aggressive, but we have gotten a lot done. So it's all true. Did anyone have any questions or about any of these materials or?
No, that's great.
Okay. Was there anything else that you wanted to share? Good.
That's it. If there are no other questions, thank you.
I have a question about more like you do these kind of things with all the towns, right?
Often.
So what's the the future, because they said with all this economy and the future thing, because that's where the forecasting is more important. What's your...
They're not economists.
No, I'm going to say, but the future, the trending is also very critical.
Yeah, and so I think
what do you hear from other towns?
Sure. Well, when we talk about a capital improvement program, the economic growth or the lack of growth, I think, will impact you in a couple different ways. We're seeing a trend where construction costs are going up. So as you're issuing debt or you're voting debt, your dollars may not be going quite as far because of the cost of construction. To build a certain facility might be more expensive. That's certainly something to be thinking about as you're talking about your CIP and you're looking at projects 2, 3, 4 years from now, trying to account for inflation. We've been another area, we've been in interest rates. We've been in a very low interest rate environment for a long time, and we've been talking about rates going higher for quite a while, and they haven't necessarily done that. I think we are entering into a phase now where we're seeing some sustained economic growth. The positive news seems to outweigh the negative news on a pure economic basis. The Fed is doing things with that short-term overnight rate, and we've seen tax-exempt municipal borrowing rates going higher. Time will tell if that sustains itself. We are still, on a long-term historical basis, we're still closer to the low end than the high end, but we have been trending slightly higher. So our expectation would be, I think it's reasonable to expect that going forward we'll be in a rising rate environment. How quickly those rates rise is the really tough part. And then I think important to you all as you're talking about capital is just cost of construction and inflation costs there that will have an impact on your project costs going forward, which ties right back to your debt capacity and debt affordability.
And one thing, no one can really tell what might happen, but the municipal bond exemption, if that went away, that would be a pretty quick...
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. There has been an effort afoot for many years of, considering removing the tax-exempt status, favorable status for municipal debt. The change in corporate tax rates this year made borrowing rates go a little bit higher because people who were investing had lower tax liabilities generally because their tax rates have gone lower. So the value of a tax-exempt bond on a relative basis was lower. So they had to see a higher interest rate on a tax-exempt bond that they wanted to invest in to offset the reduction in their tax liability. And so what that generally meant is that was another factor that has been pushing your interest rates a little bit higher. But what we're also seeing is a very low issuance environment. Not a lot of municipal debt is being issued. There's a fairly constant demand. So supply and demand for bonds has been working in your favor, helping to keep rates lower. Economy has been, positive news has been trying to push rates higher. So we got a lot of factors that kind of all impact one another. But the net effect over the last several months is it's been a relatively steady, not extreme, but steady increase in rates, and we'll have to see if that continues.
Sir, and I believe you took everything you just said, you took that into consideration when you said that in 2020, 5%. You took all that, everything you just said. It's not turning it into a worst case scenario beyond 5%. That was put into the program.
5%, correct.
Thank you.
There's no other questions for Mr. Cole?
Thank you very much. That was good.
Very much. That was a very great presentation.
Thanks.
That was the last item on our agenda. Did anyone have anything else that they needed to ask about or talk about? Okay.
Things for the round table.
Rectangle table.
We didn't really finish by 9:30. It's like a miracle.
We're not going to go into announcements or anything, but I'm going to say that next Tuesday, the 27th, we have a regular council meeting. So looking forward to that. I will be absent. Vicky Scruggs-Johnson, Mayor Pro Tem, will be running that meeting. If there's nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make that motion.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's 9:26. We are adjourned. Thank you all.